Let's get you, our top story, and that's shortly after the mother of all deals that was agreed with the European Union. It is Donald Trump, the US president, who has confirmed that India and the US trade deal has been agreed. Prime Minister Modi hailed the tariff reduction from the United States, saying that Trump's leadership is crucial for global peace. He also congratulated Trump, saying that when two large economies and the world's largest economies work together, it only benefits the people, unlocks immense opportunities for mutual beneficial cooperation. In his typical style, Trump took to social media platform Truth, announcing that US will be reducing the prevailing tariffs to 18%. He also claimed that Prime Minister Modi has committed to stop buying Russian oil and start buying American instead. Through this agreement, the reciprocal tariffs imposed on India have been lowered to 18%, while securing basically a breathing room for domestic reforms and securing export gains for Indian manufacturing and services. Listen in to this conversation between US Ambassador to India and my colleague Vishnu Sood.
Ambassador Gore, is this premised on India buying Venezuelan and American oil as a way of India stopping the import of Russian oil?
I don't want to get into too many details. I'll let the trade negotiators announce those specific details. The one thing I will say is both the Prime Minister and the President have supported bringing this conflict in Russia and Ukraine to an end. And so that's something that both sides have been in agreement on over a long time. The Prime Minister wants to see peace over there also, as does the President. And so tonight is a night to celebrate that this deal is now behind us. To put it into perspective, I will share with you that the European Union and India took 19 years to negotiate the deal. And so, people were saying, why is this taking so long? It didn't take anywhere as close or as long as the European Union. So we're thrilled by that. And again, I will say that is because of the leadership of the Prime Minister and the President.
Just a point of clarification, the tariffs have come down to 18%. So, in other words, the additional tariffs placed on India's import of Russian oil have also gone away. So the total tariffs right now stand at 18%, is that right?
The total tariff will be 18%, and that will be finalized over the next few days. There's some items that need to get signed, but the total tariffs will be at 18%.
And to know more on this, what does this really mean for India going forward? The final details aren't out yet. We're waiting for a confirmation. We're waiting for details from the MEA. Well, we also have Kate Fisher, my colleague, joining us from Washington, D.C. to tell us all that this means for the United States and what it means for the relationship between India and the U.S.
President Donald Trump broke news of the deal on social media following a phone call with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Tariffs on Indian products will drop from 25 to 18%, while the president said that US goods will enter India tariff-free. But he didn't specify when this would start. Indeed, the post was scant on detail, and the White House has not followed up with more. The breakthrough seems to have come with Prime Minister Modi's promise to stop buying Russian oil and instead buy much more from the US or, as Donald Trump suggested, also from Venezuela. The president says that Mr. Modi has also committed to, quote, buy American, and that was in full capital letters, along with an additional $500 billion to be spent on US energy, technology, agriculture and coal. Although in his post, the Prime Minister made no mention of either the oil or the extra investment. Now, previous trade deals with other major Asian trading partners like Japan and South Korea have included commitments to invest hundreds of billions of dollars into US industries. But the India announcement did not mention any specific investments. It will be a tall task for India to end its import of Russian oil, given that it makes up more than a third of India's overall oil imports. But President Trump said that Prime Minister Modi had agreed to replace India's Russian crude imports with oil from Venezuela and the US.
Aditya Rajkal, my colleague, joining us to get us more details on this. A huge sigh of relief for Indian exporters, Aditya, and of course, most of them who perhaps slept better than they have slept in months since the tariff announcement by Donald Trump, which has now finally been reduced to 18%.
Well, we have been waiting for this moment for the last many months. August is the month in 2025 when reciprocal tariffs were imposed on India. 25%, and that was increased to 25%. But joining us live and exclusive here on NDTV is Kenneth Jester, the former US ambassador to India. Mr. Jester, thank you very much for joining us live and exclusive here on NDTV with your first comments on this great development between New Delhi and Washington, D.C. We've been waiting for this moment to really happen. And finally, Donald Trump, the US president, has announced this. Your first comments. I remember meeting you, you setting the base of India-US relations when you were the ambassador here. What is going through your mind? What was your first reaction?
Well, I'm very gratified. I've been involved in U.S.-Indian relations and trade matters for 25 years, over 25 years, and this is the first deal of this magnitude between the two countries. So it's historic. It still has to be reduced to writing, and a few details need to be ironed out. But it was very important today that the Prime Minister and the President spoke and agreed on a deal, and they'll put out a joint statement. And beyond that, this is really the first phase of what both leaders have said would hopefully be a free trade agreement between the two. And unlike a lot of other deals that were announced earlier between that the United States had with other countries, this is more than just a statement. There have been substantive provisions that have been negotiated between the two sides. So it will really have some content and meat to it.
Well, certainly, it will lead to the free trade agreement between DC and New Delhi. That's what we are waiting for. We're waiting for the blueprint, the final blueprint to come in. What does this really entail? But what does this say about the top priority of the Trump administration, that is regarding the Russian oil? India had increased that significantly over the last 3 years. But now, US President says that Prime Minister Modi has agreed to reduce that to nil. Does this become a win-win situation for DC?
Well, again, I'm not exactly sure as to the details regarding that and how quickly India will reduce its purchases and how far they'll go down. I do know that India already, over the last few months, has been lowering its purchases of Russian oil, in part due to market conditions. And so this is a positive development between the two countries, and hopefully will also help provide the impetus for a peace settlement between Russia and Ukraine. And so the 25% punitive tariffs were taken off and the reciprocal tariffs were reduced from 25 to 18%.
Also, Ambassador Jester, you've been involved in the India-US ties over the last 25 years. India has enjoyed bipartisan support from the United States continuously during the strategic partnership over the last 2 decades as well. What does this say about this critical strategic partnership between India and the United States when it comes to several other important and significant issues? I think, will this build in much more rapport, much more coordination between these countries over the next few years?
Well, the strategic partnership stretches across an entire range of issues that were not really affected by these trade negotiations. The defense relationship has moved forward, the technology relationship, the energy relationship, the space relationship, and so on. But trade has always lagged behind and been a sore subject, and this now helps resolve the tensions on that issue and hopefully will provide even further impetus to the strategic partnership. And in addition, should help energize the Quad, the grouping among the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, with Prime Minister Modi hosting a leadership summit of the Quad, hopefully sometime this year, which would therefore include a visit by President Trump to India, which would be very significant.
Well, yes, we've been waiting for that US President Donald Trump visit to India during his second term as the president. But Ambassador Jester, I was about to ask you about the China angle in Asia. India right now, after the Trump announcement, has the lowest tariffs at 18%. Other competing economies have 19% and above. Could this further be reduced in talks further with some conducive measures that have been assured by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Indian government? Could we see potentially much more? Because some of the contention areas have been around agriculture and dairy. Do you think these would be no-go areas for both these countries?
Well, again, as we were referring to earlier, this is the first phase of what will be hopefully a free trade agreement. And therefore, as negotiations continue and further reductions are made in either side, this will hopefully bring down that 18% tariff. So I've always said it's important to get this initial phase done, and then there are future opportunities to reduce tariffs even further. And I actually think it's in India's interest to open up its economy. It has world-class companies. It will be further integrated into world supply chains. So it's a win-win for both countries.
Well, there's been hectic diplomacy between India and United States over more than a year now. But one comment from you, since you've been a top diplomat of US in India, one comment on Sergio Gore. He landed in India, and many believe that, he's somebody who's been very close to the Trump administration and the US president himself. And he perhaps did something here in New Delhi to speed up the entire talks process. Of course, there was the India-EU trade deal that happened just a few days ago, but Sergio Gore holding key potential meetings and making this happen. How do you react to that?
Well, I'm not on the inside, so I can't give you specifics, but certainly having a U.S. ambassador on the ground in Delhi is a positive development and can only help on this issue as well as many others. Whether he was directly involved, I don't know. I think the leads were Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce in India, and Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representatives, and then their subordinates, Brendan Lynch on the United States and Rajesh Agrawal. But having an ambassador on the ground has got to be positive, especially one who has a direct line to the president.
Well, certainly, Sergio Gore had that direct line with the US president, and that clearly did help out. Mr. Jester, thank you very much for joining us on this important broadcast. I request you to stay on with us. Back to you, Divya.
Right, Aditya, stay on with us as well. And of course, joining us now is William Boiter. William Boiter, the American-British economist, as well as professor, joining us. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on NDTV. We also have Richard Rosso, senior advisor and chair on India and emerging Asia economics at the CSIS. Again, thank you so much, sir. Now, of course, Prime Minister Modi has also taken to social media while thanking Trump. But Trump has gone on to clearly say this is out of friendship and respect for Prime Minister Modi as per his request. This is indicating a positive turn between the two countries that have had strained relationships ever since April of last year. Well, Mr. Boiter, over to you.
Yes, this is indeed significant progress, although, of course, the terms and conditions are very vague and nothing is official yet. We have to remember that. Right? To go from 50% tariffs to 18% tariffs, roughly the average tariff that the US imposes on the rest of the world, is enormous progress for India. About 50 billion worth of Indian imports will have these tariffs lowered from 50 to 18. But it's not the end of the story. We don't know when and how Russia, so India will end her imports of Russian crude oil. We don't know what has been agreed in terms of tariffs on US exports to India. Trump hinted at zero tariffs. That seems exceedingly unlikely, especially when it comes to agriculture and dairy. But non-tariff barriers to trade are also very important. So I hope that this agreement also the access of American IT companies to investments in India. So it is good news, but it is still significant uncertainty about it all. And Trump being Trump, you can never believe anything is fine.
Right. Let me bring in Mr. Rosso also in this discussion. In the current backdrop of the geopolitical tensions that we have seen over the last few years, especially in the last 1 year, where Trump has been, hectically involved in a peace process between Russia and Ukraine, and now this deal, one of the clinchers would have been the Russian oil. How do you react to that? Would India have certainly agreed to not buying Russian oil at all with the kind of pace that it had picked up over the last 3 years?
I think India has bowed to U.S. pressure a couple of times in the past, particularly with regard to Venezuela and Iran. So if the threat of U.S. pressure is real, if sanctions, including tariffs, are real, India has shown an ability to kind of move the needle a little bit in terms of where they buy hydrocarbons from. I think specifically, as we talk about what happened most recently, is it reasonable? Is it feasible? I mean, 7-8 years ago, India bought almost no hydrocarbons from Russia too, and so it is to some extent fungible. The big question is, are they going to want to pay the additional fees to be able to do that? Right now, you got about a $10 to $15 per barrel differential from buying Ural crude versus other forms that India would be able to purchase for its refineries. So there's a price to be paid, but India's trade deficit has remained relatively steady. At the same time, its economy has grown, so it is a toll that they can pay if they need to. I think if the prize is big enough, we've seen India bend that needle in the past, and maybe they're going to do so this time. But again, we just don't know. We just have a president's social media message and no response on some of those vital points from the Indian side.
We also, of course, have Kenneth Juster with us. Sir, this, of course, helps regain the market share and reduce the hit from the earlier tariff hikes. But this really comes at a price of India not dealing with Russia, not buying, Russian oil that India has been, like we've been talking about over the last 3 years, particularly since COVID. Now, also it means buying more American products. How do you see this deal going through, particularly when it comes to the pressure that India is under when it comes to its relationship with Russia, particularly when it comes to buying oil?
Well, one of the objectives of the Trump administration has been to reduce the trade deficit between the two countries, and India is therefore committed to purchase a significant amount of energy from the United States, which will make up for some of the decrease in purchases from Russia. And there was also talk of buying oil from Venezuela, as Rick has said. Prior to the Ukraine war, India purchased a very minute share of its oil from Russia, so it can clearly adjust to this. The important point is, and while details still need to be worked out in a few areas, is there was a very positive call between the president and the prime minister. They agreed in principle, and they'll issue a joint statement in the next few days. And it really, I think, eliminates some of the strain that had built up in the relationship and will give new impetus to the strategic partnership across a range of issues. So I'm very pleased. Obviously, it's always a dynamic situation, but this is better to be on this side of the dynamic than on the other side.
Right. Let me go across to Mr. Boiter at this particular stage. Over the last 1 year, the Quad had taken a back seat. But do you think that the rearrangement and the trade deal or the FTA between India and US will put that again in the forefront? Do you think that the Quad meeting that wasn't held last year, the summit could be potentially happening this year with India hosting it and perhaps the US president attending that as well? How much of focus do you think that the United States will again emphasize on the Indo-Pacific going forward?
Certainly, when India and the US were at its most stressed about the Russian oil imports, the Quad almost was viewed as a relic of the past, as gone. I think that this is indicative of further political connection strengthening that shifts India in the global geopolitical network closer to the US and somewhat further from China, which has been, I think, one of the sort of undeclared objectives of the US government in this round of negotiations with India. It is not even mainly about economics and trade. The main importance to the US of India is as a geopolitical partner in an Asia that is looking increasingly difficult and hostile.
Right. Mr. Rosso, coming to you now, there have been several irritants in the relationship in the last 10 months, particularly apart from the tariffs. There were more than 60 times President Trump coming across and saying that he was the one who brought in peace between India and Pakistan during the 4-day war. Then, of course, the tariffs that were further increased. What are the kind of difficulties that the US-India ties could possibly face up ahead? Because, Trump has been criticized for the not abiding by the rules-based order, in the last few weeks with the kind of operation that was led in Venezuela. And he has changed the dynamics of operations when it comes to diplomacy. A new kind of a Trump diplomacy, or the Trump grammar, if I can say, taking to Truth Social and indicating what his policy decisions really are going to be. But when it comes to a close partner, a strategic partner like India, how difficult would it be to take forward this trade deal and perhaps have coordination in other sectors or other, diplomatic fields as well?
Yeah, I think ties can be restored faster than I think we were thinking a few months ago. I say that because, across India, while there was frustration with, I think, how the Trump administration has handled the India relationship, there's a natural lean and inclination towards the United States. I travel around India, I travel the states, and everywhere you go, policymakers at all levels, they studied here, their kids are here, their economic ties are here. There's so much that kind of binds us together, even if the leaders have some bad days here and there. The negative side, you didn't touch on some of the big ones there too, which is on visas and immigration. That's where,
Yes.
you asked the question about what are some of the areas that might prove tension points in the future. And I think the Republican Party right now still is grappling with this idea about, kind of nativism, but also a lot of the tech companies that have went more deeply into the party that want to make sure that you've got the mobility for high-tech workers. You saw a bit of a slowdown in the need students being able to come here because of a freeze on visa appointments a while ago. So I do think there are still some unresolved tensions that Trump is going to have to kind of react to, different wings in the party, hopefully find a balance that won't upset the apple cart too much. But, the good news is that, trade remained remarkably resilient. We actually had substantial growth in goods trade in the last year. Services trade remains pretty strong. And you've got massive investments by a handful of big U.S. companies trying to take advantage of the AI and data center, which, of course, the budget a couple of days ago offers incentives there as well. So a lot of things on the upside. I think you got some bad days between the administrations, but companies oftentimes work on their own accord, and they still choose India when they've got the choice.
Well, the bad days possibly behind us, and we are looking towards the end of this so-called stalemate and perhaps good days ahead for both the US and India. Ambassador Jester, one comment on the kind of bonhomie that we have seen between Prime Minister Modi and the US President in the past. I remember when you were the ambassador and US President visited India, we had a great camaraderie, great coordination between them. The same when Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, D.C. And yesterday in his Truth Social post, the first comment was to show great respect and love and immense, good words for Prime Minister Modi. How do you see the personal chemistry or rapport between these two leaders paving the way for good ties and strategic partnership between US and India?
Okay, well, the personal chemistry has always been there. Even during this tension, there were not bad words said publicly by either leader against the other. I think it's also important to note there was never a strategic decision in the United States to reverse policy on India. The relationship in defense, technology, energy, and all sorts of other areas continued to move forward. Trade has been an issue that the president focuses on, but he doesn't do that as part of the holistic relationship. He does that focusing on trade. It did cause strain, but hopefully we will get beyond that overall. But I am optimistic that the relationship has been built up over 25 years. It's got huge dimensions to it. There's an underlying glue of the Indian American community, and I think a lot of good things will come out of this. Finally, the issue of visas, of students studying in the United States, immigration, are difficult issues, but they're not U.S.-Indian issues. They're issues more broadly about the Trump administration's policy that have an impact on India. But this was really, the trade issue was a U.S.-Indian bilateral issue that hopefully we can put behind us and regard as a great achievement, because over 25 years, we've never been able to reach a deep substantive agreement lowering barriers to trade.